Here be monsters. All right, so in 2020, I and probably all of us were very isolated in some capacity. I had also just connected with some amazing feminist science, technology, and society scholars, and we have mostly never met in person. But we were and are all interested in feminist science and technology and transforming academia. And so we came up with this game, Here Be Monsters, a mapping game for imagining alternative academic futures. My collaborators listed there are Dania and Claudia. Special shout out to both of them, but Dania also translated the entirety of the game into Spanish. If you would like a Spanish language copy, please let me know. All of the slides that I'm using show both the English and Spanish. Also, shout out and credit and much admiration to another mapping and storytelling game, The Deep Forest. Has anyone played The Deep Forest? How about any kind of storytelling, role-playing game? Cool. So if you've played any of those, you'll have some familiarity with what we're riffing on and what we're trying to do. But we are specifically thinking about the idea of Here Be Monsters, which is a riff on Here Be Dragons. However, there's a caveat, which is that it's about academia. And academia has collapsed, but you, a collection of monstrous scholars, remain. What kind of community will you create? And Here Be Dragons is a trope that probably many of y'all are familiar with from medieval European cartography. Cartographers would illustrate maps with dragons, with other creatures to indicate uncharted areas. But uncharted areas, specifically in that case, means areas that are less known to colonial powers. Later on, dragons and other monsters were added simply as ornamentation to less busy areas. In our game, we think after this collapse, those who are on the margins, those in the forgotten places of the map, are the ones who survived, not as dragons, but as techno-scientific, anti-colonial, queer, marginal, or other sorts of misfits. You are the monsters who made it through the collapse. And so for most of this talk, I'll introduce how the game works, with the not at all subtle invitation to you all to play it sometime while we're here or beyond. And towards the end, I'll introduce some of the things that have come out of the folks who have played the game so far. So the game starts with either a blank sheet of paper or a starter map. The folks that I worked with, Dania and Claudia, asked for starter maps rather than starting with a blank page, and so I did some real quick left-handed doodles of, I'm not left-handed, of kind of some islands and some water, some roads and some more water, some rivers. And then in the middle, this mycelial network. Claudia works on psychedelic medicine, and so I was a little bit inspired by that, although also mushrooms are great. So with your group, you identify 4 shared values. One should be something that got you through the collapse, that sort of thing, and then a lot of them are more open-ended. Then you go around the room and each player creates a monster and introduces them briefly. The game then proceeds through 4 different seasons, loosely organized around themes. Spring is about landscape development. Summer, this idea of thinking outside. Fall, the values start evolving more. And then winter is about memory and ritual. And in each of the seasons, there are 13 questions organized around a deck of cards, so standard playing cards divided by suits, and each player will answer 1 card by pulling from that suit separated out. And in answering those questions, well, most of them involve drawing on the map, but not always. And so I'll just introduce a few of the questions so you have a little bit of a sense of what's going on in it. So first, how do you communicate about distance and direction? Or how are the borders of your community demarcated? And this is one that comes with spring, so developing the landscape, starting to draw on that map. Then one monster sequesters itself in a tower, put the tower on the map, and describe what the monster does there. How do the others react? And another one, elite networks have fallen away. What enables this for two of the monsters? Or the ruins of an elite institution are nearby. Draw and describe the ruins. And some of these questions have two options in them that are kind of usually either opposites or complementary in some ways, for folks to have just a little bit more ability to go in a lighter or darker direction. After the game, so then the game ends with a little bit of a twist, and I'm not going to share it here because if you're playing the game for the first time, it's a little bit fun to just encounter it without me explaining it to you in advance. But also, if you read ahead in the booklet, no worries. But after the game, my collaborators and I developed some suggested post-game conversation questions, not with the idea that folks are going to then write a 5-page report, double-spaced, blah, 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 about any of these questions, but that they're conversation starters. And the first one of those is building on the idea from, and the really important point from anti-colonial and indigenous scholars and activists, that terms like the apocalypse often erase the ongoing societal rupture, violence faced by indigenous peoples and other marginalized groups, that the apocalypse is ongoing, that the apocalypse has already happened and has been happening for millennia. And so this first question is, what from the game is already present in your lives? So making those connections out of the game and into reality. The second one is thinking about taking the game and using it in a more reparative or a more transformative, active way of asking what processes or policies or practices might you take from the game and integrate into your scholarly worlds. And then the third question that I'll highlight is about the idea of monstrosity. How does your understanding of monstrosity get troubled post-collapse in the course of the game? What is a monster? What is a monstrous characteristic? And so on. And so I'll now introduce a few of the maps, and I'll say that these maps weren't created by cartographers, and I am also, as a result, I'm not saying that because I think that they're, less good or anything. I think they are awesome, and I will defend them to no end, but I am really curious what cartographers would come up with. And so I'll say that these maps were created by folks in feminist studies, folks in science, technology, and society, and then in a more than capitalist futures lab oriented towards design. And so I want to point out a few things about this and the next map. One of them is the influence of the, oh wait, did I skip one? Yes. I didn't skip that, I think I just moved ahead too soon. Okay, so one of those is the influence of the base map. My co-conspirators and I noticed that the C map, so this map with these islands, folks would emphasize the different areas more and either building bridges across them or paying attention to marginalization and integration. Whereas with the mushroom map, the mycelial network, connective thinking was more present from the start. There were fewer hierarchies. Also, there was some productive confusion about kind of what was happening and who was what or who was who. Are we humans? Are we monsters? Are we mycelia? What is the landscape? Those sort of things. One of the other things that you might notice in both of these is that the conversation didn't take obvious spatial form. And what I mean by that is people drew on the map, people had conversations, people drew the map. But I don't think that many of the folks in here would say that either of these examples fit many, possibly any of our contemporary cartographic conventions. And one of the things that, and so I was thinking about that, and I was like, okay, well, is this a problem? Should I rework the game so that it results in something more traditionally mappy? And we decided not to. And the reason for that is that the game ultimately, most generally, serves as a tool to reflect on difficult topics, one that's oriented towards possibilities. And it does that. And the other reason is a matter of perspective. I was one of the players in this game. I wasn't in the other example. And for us, when we were playing the game, it is really clear that that orange square in the center was the dance floor, and that there were ghosts of gender binaries off to the side sort of haunting it, and that there was that spatial relationship there, and then there's a tower in the pink to the left. That was really clear to us as players. So the spatial relationships were there, but it's a matter of perspective. And so I think in those respects, the game still is very mappy, as it were. And so that is all I have. I would be happy to talk with any of y'all about mapping games, creative cartography. It's been great hearing from all of the other folks, and especially this last presentation too. Thanks, Janice. And I'd also be happy to do some kind of NACIS Commons session if folks want to play the game sometime. So ping me about that or talk to me.
Thank you. We've got time for a couple questions.
Yeah.
Can you play with just 2 players, or do you need like 4 to 6?
So the question was, can you play with just 2 players, or do you need like 4 to 6? And I think 2 players would be fine if they were both like pretty into it, or willing to get pretty into it, which I feel like if you have 2 players, then they would both be. But yeah, I mean, you could technically play it by yourself, although there might not be as many of those tensions. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. One more question?
Do you have a target audience for this game?
Yeah, the question was, is there a target audience for the game? And yes, kind of. So academics, and originally it was oriented towards folks in the world of science, technology, and society, so thinking about science and culture, science and politics. And that's why there's more of a kind of technology emphasis in some of the questions, but technology is ubiquitous, and so, and science is ubiquitous in a bunch of ways, and so in that respect it is pretty broadly oriented. So academics, folks who think academia is messed up, which might be everybody, and folks who feel like playing with the game rather than necessarily just always zooming in toward planning to improve things, which is important. Planning is great and important, but also takes away from like thinking about possibilities sometimes and remembering that there's more than the next bureaucratic step.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Amazing.